Yeah, I'll try and keep this kind of briefish, which, given the challenge of my slides that Gary's pointed out earlier, hopefully I managed to get there. So what I want to do is just go through quick description of what POP is, Plymouth Octopus, how our kind of pre-COVID work has helped respond to the current situation in an HLS way, and then to describe what that kind of response is starting to shape up and look like, and then I'll finish on some questions. I'm using two systems. I've got my notes on one screen and and the slides on your screen, so I'm pressing the wrong button. Anyway, right. So Plymouth Octopus, I guess traditionally you might see us as an infrastructure organisation for charities, social enterprises, and grassroots groups. We like to see this sector being able to take a really strong role in creating the positive change that we want to be. And we do that in three ways. The core is nurturing that membership and that sector. And then either side of that, it's supporting the growth of citizen action and social connectivity in order to kind of bring forward the future generation of grassroots groups, as well as to feed the current sector with activists and people, and then working strategically across Plymouth to ensure that various conversations that are needed are being had. And I guess the way that we kind of try and major on that is being seen as someone, an organisation that can convene and facilitate really positive, exciting spaces, providing that excellent advice to the membership to ensure that they're feeling confident about what they're doing, and looking at how we advocate and are assertive in the conversations that we want to have. So our pre-COVID work. So the preface to all of this is that we benefit from core funding from Esme Fairbairn, which basically gives us the permission to do what we think is really needed. And without that, we just wouldn't be in the position that we are now. So in terms of splitting our work into the kind of HLS sort of framework, we're very, very based on relationships, trust through networks. We're doing some thinking around what does network leadership mean? How do you build networks? We made a really clear and explicit move to looking at learning, and appointing a learning champion role rather than external evaluation to embed that within the practice of the organisation. And we start to kind of move into thinking about, well, how do we use reflective practice linked to our values to kind of drive improvement and work across the charity. And then systems thinking, and I guess that comes down to being plugged in kind of, I guess, at the kind of formal system level, but then also really thinking deeply about what is it that we're actually trying to achieve. And, you know, if we want social change, what does that mean? What are the big issues that we're trying to tackle altogether? And then backing up that and kind of, I guess, being the way we go about doing our work in the foundation, we're explicit about trying to use design thinking. We're explicit about how the values base that we go about doing things through, and the practice of what does it look like to bring people together positively, so that people are heard, that different voices are heard, in order that you're able to make really good decisions and move forward in the best kind of possible way. So this I think has helped us start to respond to, you know, a lot of unknowns. You know, we kind of, this isn't a point in time kind of Grenfell Tower type crisis situation. This is now. we're going to expect waves of lockdown coming in the future. This is going to be here to stay for a long period, even if, you know, lockdown is lifted in the next few weeks for some. Clearly, those that are medically vulnerable are going to remain in self-isolation for months and months to come. So lots of stuff that we don't know. And then at the same time, we've also made an observation that, excuse the mess, but on, let's see if I can be fancy with this. So if I do that, so on this kind of left-hand side, I characterize services as being quite a linear kind of, you know, if this is city level, where it gets down to the individual, it's a service specific response, and that's exactly where the Alliance is starting to change that within a particular set of services. And then characterizing on the right is a kind of community response, which is amazingly quick, amazingly adaptable, but a little bit chaotic, a little bit sporadic, and not necessarily covering the whole population, which a more organized service response can bring. So the gap in the middle there is, so how do we basically maximize resources around the people in communities? And I think what COVID is doing is kind of feeding the need to actually really focus on communities of geography, because we want to limit the amount of movement. So how do we maximize the immediate neighbourhood capacity alongside the services, and that kind of coming together is almost, you could imagine it happening at the kind of city level, but it doesn't really happen down at the local level. So let's see if I can, yeah. So have we responded in a different way? So we've been able to kind of build on our existing relationships and trust across the city to kind of start identifying this gap and having conversations about it. We're able to kind of bring the kind of thinking around kind of network leadership and coaching as a kind of focus on principles. Our focus on learning almost means that we don't have to argue about the fact that that's really important, and actually putting in some reflective learning now, even whilst responding, is absolutely critical in order that we track the journey, and then being plugged in at that kind of system level and being recognized as, you know, being a useful player at that city level means that we can take a bit of an overview and even spot that gap. I don't think if we'd been plugged in at that kind of city level, we would have been able to confidently identify the gap that we've identified. And then in terms of our practice, that willingness and ability just to kind of step in, think really carefully, but ultimately get out and do, has helped us step forwards. Right, so this is kind of where we've ended up. So neighbourhood care networks, it's about trying to bring all those resources together in a manageable way at a neighbourhood level, acting as a bridge between that kind of formal paid service response alongside the organic community action, mutual aid type response, and the ability to kind of share knowledge and information, which in normal times doesn't have to happen really quickly, but now it has to happen really quickly. You know, we've got this need arising now, and we need a response tomorrow, if not sooner. And also another drive for this was, okay, so we've got a pool of volunteers at a city level. What do we do with them? Where do you put them? There's only so much organizations can take on. Actually, the big need is kind of doorstep and connecting people at that local level, but we had no mechanism to connect them back into communities. So it's starting to hopefully fill that gap. So the networks are So it's led by trust and relationships. So you join through recommendation or a kind of vouching system. It's about connecting these key people, these beacons that we're referring to them as from community networks, groups, mutual aid, as well as the kind of paid services and agencies that operate in an area. So it's not replacing the organic self-organizing community stuff, I think particularly relevant or I don't know, relevant at the moment is, the virus has a transmission rate. Let's beat that by these networks being kind of 2 steps removed from everybody in the community. And we've done a huge amount of thinking about safeguarding because we can't respond in the normal way. So how do we respond? And that's been hugely helped by our involvement in a funding scheme called Street Scale. So it's absolutely backed up by IT. We couldn't do it in any other way, not just because we can't meet face to face, but to achieve the levels of transparency and effectiveness, you have to use IT. So Slack to create that kind of transparency across the network, Twilio, which is a phone texting system, so we can broadcast out to nominated volunteers in the community. And our safeguarding kind of thinking has been really summarized and simplified by you just need another pair of eyes on it. So if you're making an introduction, you need other people involved, and the best way to do that is through WhatsApp. In order to kind of create that layer of transparency over individual relationships. So we back up the kind of IT infrastructure with, so we're thinking really carefully about the network operational kind of guidance, how to set it up, how to use Slack, how to use Twilio, what do you need to do in terms of thinking about safeguarding. In line with our kind of learning around networks, we've put in coaching on day one, and we'll be kind of developing that as we go along. A bit of kind of small scale funding to kind of just oil the wheels of action. We can link in and become a kind of citywide information feed, and then where that network is connecting into the community, what guidance can POP give them to just support community groups, and then recognizing that some of the most vulnerable are absolutely not online, don't have tech, then linking in with a local newspaper called the Plymouth Chronicle and taking out some pages in that to communicate messages. So you won't be able to read this, and I'm going at speed. So I'll not spend much time, but this is translating the kind of values principles into, I've called it a rule sheet, but that might change. It sounds a bit kind of ruly. Anyway, so that's that, which kind of leads me to the last point. So we're not fully functional yet. So we've not got stuff up and running. Communities are doing it themselves. So organically, people have organized themselves into kind of similarly minded networks. So it is out there, it's happening, and it's our job to start building the scaffold and the structure around that, so that we get the organic and the structure being mutually supportive. And I think, the question that is really coming out for me, and I've shamelessly kind of basically stolen some of the stuff that's come out of the Frameworks Institute, is how do we tell that story of connection, collaboration, and how we work together to get the future right. How do we capture stories, and how do we capture the learning? But probably more importantly, how do we demonstrate that? Right, that's me done.